ideologies.com.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show this happy Thanksgiving Thursday. Wow, what a great show so far. And we are going to be speaking now to Ted Torbich about false flags. So Ted, thanks for coming on the show. And I was hoping that maybe you could start, I haven't had you on the show. And for my listeners, even though you're here and have been here on the Inception Radio Network, but maybe you can give them a little bit of history about who you are, a little bit about your background and what you bring to the table.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it, Rita. And of course, I've had you on my show before, and we talked about your book and prehistory, pre-human history, and possible alien intervention. I'd say my history when it comes to topics such as this go back to personal research that I did starting in the early 90s, I would say. I started out, like most people do, with the John F. Kennedy assassination and moved on from there into looking at a lot of other conspiratorial angles concerned with the government and with the general overall idea of the United States from the point of view of because a lot of people have this notion that everything's just, associated with the government. But in my experience and from what I've been able to research, there are so many other aspects to things where there are secret cabals that rule the economy, that take action and sub rosa plots in various aspects, not least of which within our culture, within sociology, psychology, et cetera, et cetera. So I come from a long history of doing personal research, and then probably about 2007, I think it was 2007, I started doing videos on YouTube where gradually my show evolved over time into doing mostly political and economic stuff from a left perspective and trying to show the reality of politics within this country. So I started doing that, and that became a thing. I'm still doing videos for YouTube now, so it's been quite some time. And from there, I went on to do a radio show on Blog Talk Radio and eventually moved to Inception Radio Network, where I was for quite some time. And now I'm on a break, taking some time off just because I just had too many things on my plate. So I took a break from doing the radio show, but I cover a lot of the topics that you talk about, Rita, and dealing with conspiracy, dealing with the paranormal, such as Mothman. I've done several shows about Mothman, and all kinds of things dealing with ghosts, the paranormal, alternate realities, consciousness studies, deep psychology, archetypes, you name it. So that's basically a brief bio.
Well, one of the things that I find in doing the kind of work that you and I both do is that there is a never-ending supply of areas to investigate and subjects to cover that all seem to interact and interweave with each other, where you can't just say, oh, well, there might be UFOs, but there can't be ghosts, or there can't be, psychic phenomena, because it just seems like they're all connected.
Oh, absolutely. That's my firm belief. Over time, the reality is that what we have in a situation right now with the different groups of people that investigate these various topics is everybody's entrenched within their own positions. And oftentimes we have an old guard that wants to keep the status quo. But I think that there are a lot of people now who are embracing the idea of an overarching theory to be at the root of all of these phenomena, whether they be UFOs, whether they be cryptids that you could never find any evidence for, etc. And that would include ghosts and other aspects of the paranormal as well.
I just think it's really cool. I just say, I'm alternative because I don't really stick in one area and don't want to, but it sounds like even in your interests, you don't really stick in one area. You cover kind of a broad spectrum of different topics that all of them are interesting, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it, obviously, right? It's interesting to me. I'm fascinated by mysteries. And when I started looking into conspiracies and seeing the reality of them and seeing how there is this mentality that's put out by the mainstream media and also by the government and the intelligence agencies working with black and gray propaganda, they attempt to control the public's perception of things so that it's only relatively recently that you could actually hear anybody on like a mainstream news show talk about a conspiracy theory or something like this. But you do occasionally hear it now because it has become so widespread that the media can't ignore it anymore. Even if they jeer, even if they make fun of it, they have to talk about it.
But that idea of controlling the population, controlling thought, isn't even a new thing. It's something that has gone on for thousands of years, in my opinion. I mean, what do you think about that?
Oh, of course. The very first control system that ever came down was religion. That was probably the best thing that man ever came up with to control people. Now, if you think about it, if you just think about this, okay, we have no country on earth. We have no nation state. We have no empire. We have nothing that has ever existed as long as the Roman Catholic Church. And it's been in existence since about 325 AD, when they had the council with Constantine, where they set down the canon. And this has been an unbroken religion for that long a period of time. And there are still people that are well entrenched within that viewpoint. And when you make that comparison, it becomes quite obvious that this is a very successful method of control. And I would imagine that governments and other people who are interested in controlling people have taken quite a few lessons from religion over the years.
They went to Catholic school. So.
Well, let's hope they made it out alive. How about that? Or at least untouched, as it were.
So the topic I really wanted to cover, because I really like hitting topics on this show, is the concept of false flags. And,
yes.
So what is a false flag? Because I don't think everybody knows what that phrase even means.
Well, it actually originates back during the pirate times, I believe, back in the heyday of the pirates. And for the pirates to take over to get close to a vessel that they wanted to board and or capture, they would fly a different flag, pretending to be somebody else. And that's why they have the term false flag. But basically what it means is if you have a entity, whether it be a government or some other corporate entity or anything like this, is going to make an event happen, okay, and then make it seem like somebody else did it when they actually did it themselves. So, for instance, a very famous example would be the blowing up of the Maine in the harbor in Cuba. And that was used as a pretext to go to war. And there is some evidence to indicate that the Maine was sabotaged. And if that's the case, then the actual authorities in the United States, in one fashion or another, or some faction therein, may have actually manufactured that in order to justify their going into Cuba. Another one would be during the run-up to the Vietnam War. There was the, what was it called? I'm trying to remember the name of it off the top of my head. But they had another program there where they supposedly, American ships were supposedly attacked by Vietnamese army or navy or whatever from boats. And that was part of the justification for the U.S. to escalate in Vietnam. And again, that was another thing that was shown to be manufactured by the military and or intelligence agencies of the United States government in order to justify their actions in moving forward in Vietnam. That was the Gulf of Tonkin, by the way, the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Yeah, never heard of it, but that's okay. So, I mean, and that's their goal, is to motivate people, motivate public opinion. I mean, why do they do these things?
Most of the time, it's because they have a specific target in mind. Now, some people believe that 9/11 was a false flag operation. In other words, there are those who believe that the United States government was the principal actor in orchestrating the attacks that happened on 9/11. And they used cutouts. And cutouts is a term. A cutout is someone that can be put to use that doesn't have any connection to the agency that is putting them to use, so that they can be used relatively freely without fear that any repercussions will come back to whoever is actually pulling the strings. And if that is in fact the case, then one simply has to look at the outcome to realize what the goal was, and that was to go into Afghanistan and into Iraq. And I think that there are many motives for why the U.S. government would want to do that, or at least factions within the U.S. government. So it's usually to go to war, or it's over resources, or it's to deflect attention away from problems that are within the country in question, so that people are then called to rally around the flag and be all patriotic, and there will be less resentment against the government, less questioning of the government and what policies they want to enact. So you can usually find a specific thing that whoever set up the false flag was going after simply by looking at the aftermath.
Well, starting that whole war, or whatever you want to call it, because it really didn't seem like a war, never made any sense to me. And when I start looking at what happened in the aftermath, to me, the thing that had the biggest impact was implementing the Patriot Act.
Yeah, and of course, on the other side of the coin, there is the cultural manipulation, and there's a gradual slide in this country towards a fascist oligarchy. And I think what we're seeing now is probably what was going to be put in as our government back in the late 30s, early 40s, when there were several attempts on Roosevelt's life. And when General Smedley Butler was called in by industrialists and other very wealthy people and connected people to lead an army to take over the government, to form a fascist sort of dictatorship in this country back at that time. I think they've adopted a new approach where they're just going to do it gradually over a period of time. So they've taken a lesson from the Fabian socialists by using the gradualism to bring in this new totalitarian police state that we seem to be going towards.
Well, that's kind of a scary thought, because we think of ourselves as being, free. But it seems like every day our freedoms are being taken away one at a time, just little by little. And you get accustomed to having one thing taken away, and then they take away something else, and then something else.
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct. And it's by increments. It's just a very small thing at first, and then it's added on to over time. And it eventually will lead to the kind of police state that we're seeing happen around us in broader terms now. But practically every day when you look at the media, you can see evidence of this police state in action, where you have National Guard troops being used for some purpose that they shouldn't be used for, when you have the military teaming up with law enforcement agencies because posse comitatus is practically dead. You have the militarization of the police, which kind of bypasses the need for posse comitatus to be taken away anyway, because the police are basically acting like a military in-house. And it's scary. It's scary, and that's and if you look since 9/11, okay, whatever your views are on who was behind 9/11, there were two objectives that came out of that. One was to go to war, and the other was to clamp down here at home to eventually stop the kind of protests that would happen when it was finally revealed that, hey, wait a minute, maybe this story that we've been told all this time is not true. Maybe we should have never went to war. And there are a lot of people questioning a lot of things that have happened as a result of that. And that's a modern example of what you can see, because they anticipate these things. Whoever is running the show, they anticipate this stuff because they've been doing this a long time, and they've learned over the years from the very best.
We'll come back to who that might be down the road. I just find it interesting because we spent years in a Cold War fighting communism and socialism, but it sounds like where we're going is such a turn from the philosophy that we had to something that we were just fighting about, 50 years ago.
Well, yeah, to a certain extent. I think there's this sort of there's a sort of narrative that's being played out in this country, where you have the so-called right wing and the far right people who are always talking about, President Obama being a socialist or a closet Marxist or something like this. And they constantly spew out this idea of socialism. And socialism is akin to fascism in a certain way, because fascism came out of National Socialism in Germany. And they do have, they're kind of similar, but they're not the same. And the reason why you never hear a right-wing person accuse Obama of being a fascist is because that's what they want. They want fascism. So in order to keep the ball rolling, they have to scare everybody with this idea of socialism or communism, and when in reality, it's going to be the same system we have now. There's not going to be any appreciable difference. The only thing that's going to happen is that you're going to have less freedoms and less rights, and the executive and whoever it is that's behind the executive giving the orders is the one that's going to actually be pretty much in charge of everything. And it's a terrible state of affairs, because people need to understand that there's a difference between these different ideologies, and that they in and of themselves may not be an accurate reflection of what they're supposed to be. In other words, these definitions have been turned around and skewed and spin so much over the years that you can't even use a political ideological term in its pure form, because if you ask 10 people, they may have 10 different opinions about what you're talking about.
Well, one of the things that I've heard is that, because you're talking about fascism, which was the Nazis were fascists, correct?
Yeah, and Mussolini's Italy as well during World War II.
Okay. And so, but I've heard people talk about, like the Third Reich isn't dead, or like Jim Mars's material talking about the rise of the Fourth Reich. I mean, is that kind of what you're talking about?
Absolutely, yes. The Germans after World War II, they went to the Soviet Union. A lot of the scientists went to the Soviet Union. A lot of their best brains went there. A lot of the best brains came here to the United States. And pretty much there weren't any restrictions between these German scientists talking to and corresponding with one another. And I think it's pretty much been proven over the years that the Gehlen Org, which was absorbed into the CIA, which was the entire Eastern German espionage and intelligence wing of the Third Reich, which was just basically folded into the CIA after World War II, that they manufactured the Cold War. They overestimated Soviet developments in order to force the United States to spend more on weapons and armaments, and they did the same thing to the Soviet Union, telling they were whispering in the ears of the Soviets, saying that the United States is preparing for first strike capability. You need to do something. So that started the arms race, and eventually, what it did was it allowed a third force to operate without scrutiny from the two great powers, because the two great powers were too focused on one another.
Pretty tricky.
Yeah, well, it's dirty pool, but it works,
But it works.
Yeah, it works. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with Jim Mars. There is a Fourth Reich. I don't think it resides within any country. It's a philosophy that's adopted by people that are within various countries around the world, but there is a very strong element of this within this country. And it's a legacy of all of the Nazis that were incorporated into our space program, into our corporate establishments in this country, and the legacy that they leave behind to eventually have a Fourth Reich spring up somewhere in the world. If it's not in Germany, then why not the United States? Why not the former Soviet Union? Why not anywhere where they have a foothold? And it seems like the U.S. is moving in that direction. So I'd have to think that there are forces at work within this country that want to bring that about.
But with globalization going on, why would it really get limited to the United States?
Well, that's true, and that's why I say that this could happen anywhere, and there probably will be actions that will be taken against certain other countries that are not playing ball, that are not moving along. And this is what you see with the Project for the New American Century, where they targeted these specific countries, including Syria, which we, avoided war with them, thankfully, but who knows if it's going to come up again. But Iran is still on that list. I think Lebanon is on that list, and we've yet to see a final resolution to all that stuff.
So are you talking about like the Libya and Egypt stuff, where they just kind of went in and got rid of the people in charge?
Yes, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Iran, Lebanon. And there might have been one other country. I think Somalia might have been in that list as well. And these were all taken out and Libya too, as you mentioned, because the governments were nationalist governments. They were more focused on doing things to better their country, grow their countries, and the nationalism is sometimes painted as a bad thing, because of the legacy of the Nazis, with the National Socialist Party and what have you. But nationalism is not a bad thing in my point of view, because the nation state is really the only power that can stand up to some of the very large and powerful organizations that are operating in this world right now, such as huge multinational companies that command, hundreds of billions of dollars in transactions, and, countless amounts of money that they've gotten through bailouts and backdoor schemes and outright fraud and all this sort of thing. And so nationalism is not a bad thing from my point of view, but it is a bad thing from the point of view of globalization and people who want to push this idea of so-called free trade.
I know you're talking about bailouts. It's like, oh, let's just not even go there. That's that's a scary topic. Okay, I want to come back to the whole false flag concept. Are there any kind of signs that tend to indicate that an event is a false flag event?
Well, some have claimed that the Boston Marathon bombing was some kind of concocted operation. Maybe not a false flag because there wasn't a specific enemy to point at, just a couple of young men, supposedly. But when you look at that and you examine the photography and the videos and things that came out of that event, you can see some strange characters around. So obviously, whenever these operations are put into effect, if you can pinpoint where there are people who shouldn't be there, are there, they may be there to oversee or to report on exactly what's happening as it's happening, so that the narrative can be constructed right from the very beginning. So that's one thing: out of place people, out of place events, or standard operating procedures that are not followed for whatever reason. Those are a couple of very important things to look out for whenever you're discussing false flags.
Well, and it's, you brought up, the Boston Marathon bombing, but I have heard allegations, because Sandy Hook was right before that people that were appearing in the news in Sandy Hook were also appearing in the news in the Boston bombing, and they would hold film clips side by side, and they have different names and they had different roles, like they were just actors. Yes.
And even when you go back to the shooting at Sandy Hook and Boston bombing and the shooting at Sandy Hook have a couple things in common in that way, because there's this idea of crisis actors now, which is a real big thing in the conspiracy community, and there really are crisis actors. They are actual real people that actually go and they stage events, presumably to help emergency services practice for real live events. Now, see, that's another thing that is a hallmark of false flags. Usually there will be some kind of test, some kind of drill, some kind of thing that's going on at the time that a false flag is pulled off. And this is a way to allow the event to happen, because at the time people are distracted by the drill. And 9/11 was a good example of this, where you had frantic air traffic controllers trying to figure out what was going on, because a lot of them knew that there were many drills that were going on that day, and they didn't know if the hijackings were real, if they were a part of the exercise, this delayed response. And then, of course, you had stand-down order that was given by Cheney. And that's a departure from standard operating procedure. Another time another thing to look for whenever you look at false flags. And then these crisis actors came into this at Sandy Hook whenever it was discovered that one of the witnesses up there, who I can't remember his name right now, but supposedly he was an actor, and he was interviewed several times about his interactions with the children who had fled from the school area after the shooting had started, and supposedly gathered in his house, and there was this whole narrative around that. And that guy came under scrutiny, and it was found out by somebody that he really was an actor. Now, whether he was acting on that day, I don't know, but certainly his actions and everything that he said were really bizarre, to me anyway. And there were bizarre actions taken by other people as well. When you examine the Boston bombing, you can see in some of the pictures that are available online, you can go look at them yourself, you can see that the actions of people in the crowd don't seem to correspond to what you would expect. And that's another thing that might indicate that there are people there that are not supposed to be there. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, for instance, like in Boston, there were these craft service people there who or craft international people, I should say, not craft services. That's something totally different. Craft international, this mercenary force that supposedly there were several people from that force that are visible in photographs. And those are people that shouldn't be there. And at the same time, they were running dogs through the crowd, supposedly doing a drill for bomb sniffing dogs at the same time. And you see this all the time. You go into London for the 7/7 bombings, same thing. Drills were happening. There were actual drills going on at the time. And 4 bombings in the subway. And that's exactly what they had. So people hijack onto a drill, and when it goes live, nobody knows what to do. So it delays responses. It allows people to escape the area who need to escape in order to avoid being caught.
Well, I think that's interesting. They had bomb-sniffing dogs, but they couldn't find the bomb.
Yeah, isn't that rather interesting? Yes.
One of the things, I wanted to talk about the underwear bomber. Because one of the things that came out of 9/11 is that we ended up with the Patriot Act. And it seemed like with the underwear bomber, it was like right behind that, we ended up with the full body scanners. So is that, it just seems like something will happen and they're able to like slide in this stuff. And so, is that something that you typically see happening after these different events? Is that they like slide in some other measure of control?
Yeah, pretty much, because like I said before, it's like a two-pronged approach. They have to, the powers that be, we'll just call them that for now, they have to control the populations that are going to be affected by whatever event that they have happen. So they have to enact measures that will tend to dampen any kind of outlash from the public, because in reality, even though the United States has the largest, most well-equipped army in the world with countless weapons and everything else, it would be a really terrible thing from the powers that be point of view if the people of this country got fed up with everything that they're being fed and rose up in revolt. Because even if they were able to defeat that revolution, that rebellion, it would be so devastating to the country and to the infrastructure that the aftermath would be too costly. So they build into these programs a program of control against the people who are going to be affected. So the Patriot Act comes into effect, and then you have the TSA and the body scanners and all of the other things that came out of all of those events. It's an effort to keep the people from taking any action by making them constantly afraid, to think that there's a terrorist coming after them at any moment, that their plane could blow up or be taken over and crashed into a building or something like this. So, and by increments and by using, somewhat some kind of logic, I don't know whether it's, real rational thinking, but When you put it out on a piece of paper and you say this, and then people say, well, it doesn't seem so bad because we got to be protected. So they allow it to happen. And then when something more draconian comes down the line a little bit later, it's only a little bit more. So everybody say, okay, well, that's fine. I guess I can't do this now because, we might have a problem with it. So it's a two-pronged thing. Go to war over here, keep the people under control at home.
What I find interesting is, they put in the TSA, they put in the full body scanners, and they haven't found a bomb. They haven't found anything.
That's right. And there haven't been any major acts of terrorism in the United States since 9/11. And there probably never will be from any actual terrorists, in my view. If we do have another event in this country, it's likely to be something that is being manufactured rather than being a real terrorist attack.
One of the things that I felt, we talked about Sandy Hook and Boston, like especially after Sandy Hook, there was the big push about gun control again, but it seemed bigger than the usual push about gun control. But it kind of seems like, these events happen and people are kind of seeing through them, or people are questioning them, and they're not getting the kind of support they're hoping for.
A lot more now are questioning what is going on than probably I've ever seen in my life, really. I mean, most people just walk around in a daze. And I was guilty of that for, half my life. That's the way I went about business. It was just whatever was going on, whatever, the media said, I just believed, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit that now, but really it's the truth. And I don't think anybody should be, should feel bad for themselves that they were pulled into that kind of mentality, because that's the way the system is designed. It's designed to produce people like that. But so we do have a time now where people are questioning things. But I have a different take on the whole gun control thing than maybe some other people do. And that is that gun control is only used as an issue within the public sphere to cause conversation, to cause controversy, and to cause people to look and wring their hands. So on the one hand, you'll have your so-called bleeding heart liberals who'll say, "Oh, the children, we need to do something about the guns." And then you have the people on the right saying, "Oh, Second Amendment, you can have all the guns you want." And my point of view on gun control is that it does not serve the interests of the elites and the powers that be to have any kind of gun control or gun confiscation. And the reason why is very simple, and that is because guns in this country that kill people, guns that are used for crime, for murder, for whatever, for robberies, everybody is preying on everybody else within the same class system. You never hear about a deadly shooting in a corporate boardroom. You never hear about a deadly shooting at an elite retreat somewhere. You never hear about a deadly shooting that takes out a whole room of billionaires somewhere, okay? And just like you look at the shootings that happen in your own city on any given day, it's someone in the lower classes who kills someone else in the lower classes. So it serves the interests of the elite and the powers that be to keep the guns in the hands of the people, because they are used by the people to prey upon one another and never used to go after the true enemies. And I'm not advocating violence here by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just trying to make a point.
But, I don't think people really think about that. But you're right. You never hear about that kind of stuff. Either that or it's so hushed up that you don't hear about it.
Well, I don't think it ever happens. But I'll tell you one thing for sure, Rita, and here's your recipe for gun control or confiscation. If someone were to go into like the board meeting of Goldman Sachs and God forbid, shoot everybody in there, then probably within about 2 weeks, you'd have some kind of massive gun control legislation pushed through Congress and signed by the president. And it wouldn't matter what kind of uproar there was from the people, it would be put through, because the elite, the rich, the ultra rich, the super giant rich. I'm not just talking about the wealthy doctor that lives down the street from you. I'm talking about the super ultra rich who are part of this overarching powers that be, network. As soon as they're victims of it, then you'll see the government take action. But until then, it's not going to happen.
So do you mean the outcry by the American people because they're happy that those people at Goldman Sachs that got the bailout finally got their just desserts? Just kidding. Oh, go ahead.
Well, actually, I wouldn't shed a tear because they're all thieves. They're all dirty, rotten thieves.
Well, I mean, but that was kind of, like the guy who took his little small plane and he flew it into the IRS building, and people were like, he's a terrorist. It's like, no, he's a frustrated American.
Right.
Congratulations to him. I mean, that sounds bad, but I could understand where he was coming from.
Absolutely. So, when they talk about gun control, it's only to talk about it. And the most they've ever been able to do is have this assault weapons ban. And after Sandy Hook happened, I talked about this a bit in videos that I did, and maybe even on my radio show, when they were really pushing for some kind of gun control within Congress. And it made me think back to when they had the assault weapons ban back during Clinton's time. And the deal is that that's all it is talk. They never actually do anything. And if they do ban assault weapons, that's not going to do anything, because the 99.9% of gun crime, gun murder, and anything having to do with guns, it's small arms, it's pistols. It's mostly pistols. It's mostly things that would not fall under the category of an assault weapons ban. And they never talk about that at all.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was the part I really didn't understand. But it did seem that like there was a pretty big outcry from the American population against the gun control law, just because people were feeling like I'm not a gun person. I've never shot a gun. I don't like guns in particular. However, there's a big however. I don't think it's right that you could take it away from me. It's none of your business.
Oh, I agree. I agree 100%. If we're going to live under a system of laws based on the Constitution, then the Constitution has to be the supreme law. Now, if it is, then that's an absolute right that people have that the government cannot infringe upon. And yet there are laws that do regulate arms and ammunition and all these kinds of things, which is reasonable within a society. But more so than the Second Amendment is the erosion of our other rights, like the Fourth Amendment. And we see people summarily executed all the time by police who are out of control. And this is another indication of the police state that we're more and more encroaching. That's more and more encroaching upon our so-called republic here.
Mm-hmm. Changing topics here a little bit.
Sure.
Have you ever noticed where an event is happening, I don't know, a bomb goes off in China, or they have sarin gas or whatever, but something goes on over there. And then here, or Paris Hilton, falls down a flight of stairs, whatever the story is, but there's some story that hits the news and will stay there for weeks. And in the meantime, there's some other thing going on in our government, and they slide some bills through, at 12:05, on the day before, on Christmas Eve, that impacts all of us, and it just seems like there's almost this kind of bait and switch thing going on where they don't report, what I think should be important news stories about us and our lives to talk about something that really doesn't make a difference.
Sure. I absolutely agree with that. I think it's true. And the other thing you have to keep in mind, too, is the attention span of the average person is really, really short. And it's deliberately done so. And that way, because over time, things will change. Like with Sandy Hook, you'll remember, and I'm sure you'll remember, that the idea of gun control and passing some kind of laws it was all over the news, and that's all they talked about for weeks and weeks and weeks. But here we are now, and there is not one story, not one anything talking about gun control. And the people who are so up in arms to have it don't seem to be saying anything about it anymore. And that's due to the lack of attention that people have. They can't stay focused on any one issue for too long a period of time because there's too many baubles and shiny things that are around to distract people away from more important issues.
Crazy.
It is. We're living in a crazy world, Rita. I'm sure you can agree that we're living in a sort of bizarro, backwards world where it's almost like 1984. It almost is, really. Where black is white and white is black and war is peace and all that kind of stuff, the newspeak and everything else. It's here in certain extent, you know what I mean? But yet some of the worst aspects of it are still a ways away. So hopefully, we could do something about it in the meantime. But I think that when you talk about the bait and switch, it happens all the time. Just look at Obamacare. When they first came out with this healthcare legislation, there was supposed to be a public option. And that was thrown under the bus by Obama himself, right out of the gate. Mr. Pre-Compromiser in chief, who gives stuff up before you even begin negotiating. And so, yeah, we have a huge bait and switch. They tell you they're going to have a law about something, and then it turns out that, it has something to do with that, but it really does something totally different, or it does way more than they said it was going to do. And the ramifications of it are far more broad than what people are led to believe. Just like with the Patriot Act. There's a section of the Patriot Act that all of it is free to read. You can go read it anytime you want, the whole thing. But there's a section of it that the government has a secret interpretation of the meaning of that they will not release to the American people. And that just goes to show you that there are things that are hiding within plain sight that people don't know about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I had Jesse Ventura on in the first hour, and I had him on the show right around the time he was going through that whole court case about the pat down and, going through the airport. And they wouldn't take, it was right after they basically, threw his case out because what the TSA is supposed to do as part of Homeland Security. And so they couldn't make a determination if they were being unlawful because they were unable to find out what the law was to make a determination because it's secret.
Yes, exactly. And that's like, and you see the same thing too, Rita, with the Star Chamber that is the oversight court for secret wiretaps and all this sort of thing. Every time something is submitted to that body, they approve it. I think they may have turned down one request for special access, and they probably turned that down just as a thing to say that we didn't approve everything. I honestly believe that. I mean,
I don't. Yeah.
I think they probably came to them and said, "This is a bogus one here, so turn this one down, and it'll appear like you're actually doing your job." There's no oversight over any of these things. They're all rubber stamped.
One of the other things that I've heard rumors about with some of these situations, especially like Columbine, or there was the movie theater shooting, because usually the people that are involved get eliminated. The perpetrators get eliminated accidentally, oops. But the ones that actually survive, you hear these stories about, well, they don't really remember what they did. Do you think that there's some kind of mind control going on?
That's a tough one. We're all subjected to certain levels of mind control on a subconscious and conscious level every day through the media and through other things that we interact with, whether they be games, TV, etc. So there is definitely mind control happening on a wide scale. Now, what you're talking about, I think, is more intensive invasion of someone's consciousness.
Well, I was trying to think of that movie, which totally escapes me, where they did the mind control on the guy and he was supposed to shoot the president.
Would that been Manchurian Candidate?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, Manchurian Candidate. Yeah. Now that's a classic look at exactly what you're talking about when you talk about mind control in the sense you mean it. That is an invasion of someone's brain in order to create a different personality and or a tool to be used. And in the Manchurian Candidate, this person was hypnotized and subjected to all kinds of torture and stuff to break down their personality. And then they were given a key thing that would unlock that hidden aspect of themselves. And in the case of the Manchurian Candidate, it was a playing card. It was the Queen of Hearts. So anytime he saw a Queen of Hearts with a certain phrase, he would be activated, and they could give him orders and tell him what to do, and he would remember them, and he would carry them out at the time that was required. So you asked me if there's mind control going on. I think there is. Now, I can't say with any certainty whether or not any of the people involved in any of these shootings, including Holmes, who is the Aurora theater shooter, allegedly anyway, I can't say with any definity whether or not any of these people have been messed with. But when you look at some of them in the aftermath of the shootings, you had Holmes, who was going to college, apparently, somewhat well-adjusted, etc. And then after the shooting happens, he's like a zombie. So, what does that mean? Does that mean that he's being subjected to some sort of chemical agents, whether it be massive psychotropics or whatever, in the aftermath of this, because he just went over the edge and he went crazy? Or was he manufactured, at some point in time to do the things that he did? I think it's possible, but I certainly couldn't prove it.
Well, we'll never find out, but it's just
we're never going to know who killed Kennedy. Rita.
I mean, do you think that was a false flag type event as well?
I think they probably wanted to use it for that. I think they wanted to use it for that purpose, but I think things spun out of control. I kind of liken 9/11 to JFK in that you can make the case for any number of actors being involved in the actual planning and operation of both events. You could prove the mafia killed Kennedy by, countless different examples. You could prove the CIA killed Kennedy by countless different examples. And the truth is that all of these groups were involved in one aspect or another. So they're all guilty. And that escapes a lot of people. Someone wants to have a particular theory that says such and so did this and that's the answer. But it's not that simple. And 9/11 is another example of this, where you had multiple different people carrying out different actions, different parts of the scenario. It's all broken down. And then in the aftermath, you can't piece anything together with any reliability because there's just too much information for you to go on. Because you have this guy that supposedly did this, but no, this guy says that guy didn't do that. And, it turns into a big soup where you can't ever get anything solid out of it.
But it seems like in some of these cases, that's part of the cover-up?
Well, it assists the cover-up for sure. There's no question about that. It assists the cover-up because even if there was a diligent agency that was actually digging into this and looking to try and find the truth of what's going on, they will not be able to get to it because there are so many layers of distractionary things that are going on and evidence that points in other directions other than where the real guilty lie. So that no investigation could really ever solve the crime, because at any given time it could prove, one of several different groups to be the guilty parties, when in actual fact it may be somebody else, or it may be all of them acting in concert in some fashion.
Mm. It just becomes this question that you don't really even want answered because it just boggles the mind. But Ted, our time is up. This hour went so fast.
That was really fast. Yeah,
it was really fast. So, remind the listeners about your webpage and your videos and all that good stuff.
Oh, I'm on YouTube, okay, and of course with YouTube integrating with Google now, I'm there under my actual name, so you can find me under Ted Torbich, or you can look for The Stench of Truth. That's the name of my show on YouTube. And of course, my website is thestenchoftruth.com, and you can go there and you can get linked to my Facebook, Twitter, and all that good stuff. I'm pretty active on Facebook, so if you want to stop over and check me out on Facebook, you can do that. If you want to friend me or whatever, send me a message, you can do that as well, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. And I want to thank you, Rita, for having me on the show today. I really appreciate it. And it was a real fun talk, and as you said, it went super fast.
It did. And I hope you enjoyed the rest of your Thanksgiving. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out today and play with me.
It was my pleasure, Rita, and I enjoy playing with you, Rita. So
cool.
I would do it anytime. All you got to do is send me a message. I'll be more than happy to come on anytime you need somebody, and if we can work out the schedule, of course. But that shouldn't be a problem. But it's been a pleasure, and once again, just to end this on a positive note, which is what I try to always do very quickly, to say that there is always going to be an avenue that people can take. There is always something that you can do. There is always something positive that you can do, whether it just be within your own local community, within your state, your county, whatever, that can give you a sense of accomplishment and help you to make some positive changes, so that you're not just bogged down in all the stuff that we're being hit with all the time.
Great. Sage words of advice. Ted, I am going to let you go. You have a great rest of your evening, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's Ted Torbich. His website is thestenchoftruth.com, but check out his YouTube videos at stenchoftruth.com. And next week, we are going to have my good friend Brian Forrester back on the show talking about updates from the Giza Plateau. And so until next week, everyone have a great rest of your night. Happy Thanksgiving, and be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to